Meditators, from the largest esports sponsorship in history to Major League Baseball to the Miami Heat Stadium, FTX are announcing new partners every single week. And we had the honor of being the first podcast to bring on Burg, head of partnerships at FTX. Get ready for all sorts of insights, and if you want to help me improve my partnership abilities, remember to like and subscribe below. To stay one with the crypto markets, sign up and receive 6 free market meditations newsletters a week. You'll find a link in the description below. And a quick thanks to our partners, Nexo, for making this podcast possible. There will be more on them later. Meditators, welcome to another episode of the Market Meditations podcast. Now, I'm really surprised that this is the first podcast to have on the head of partnerships at FTX, Burg, who has done so much over the last 12 months that it's become the norm for me now to see a ridiculous partnership come out of FTX that just blows and makes a whole bunch of noise. Thank you so much for joining us, Burg.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks for having me. Yeah, you're right. First podcast, so a bit nervous, but let's see how we go.
If the pre-conversation is anything to go by, I think this is going to be a really exciting episode. Can we start with what head of partnerships means? So is that job to find partners for FTX? Does it go beyond that? Is there a whole team around it?
Yeah, of course, and there's actually a ton of people doing, a ton of good work. So, obviously can't claim all of the partnerships, and those guys sort of know who they are. But yeah, the sort of role, I guess, sort of looking at everything, at a partnership level, and in the early days, it was like, crypto partners, integrations, influencers, getting people connected, to the API, and sort of VIP and institutional clients, and then, of course, at a broad level, most people at FTX do very general, business development type of stuff. So we sort of have historically had a pretty small team, which has sort of meant that everyone sort of is involved in, sort of a lot of the different aspects. And then, of course, as we've sort of grown, that sort of has become, a bit more specialized, and it's always sort of, and still is, sort of something where, if you really want to work on something, or if you're really passionate about something, or if you have those connections, then I think, we've ultimately found that the people who sort of have that passion, do the best work. So it makes sense for them to sort of focus on doing that.
How do you identify passion?
Well, yeah, I guess maybe we get into this, a touch more as it sort of comes along. But, for example, I really like playing League of Legends, and, that sort of meant that I've had a pretty big part in the TSM partnership, and obviously also the LCS partnership that, sort of just went live. And, sort of, we have guys on the team like Zane, who's really into the MLB, and, I'm an Australian, so I won't put my hand up and say I know very much about the MLB, but he loves it. So when you're sort of interested in it, and you sort of have a passion for it, and you like it, and you sort of really involved, and you sort of have good ideas, then you ultimately I think that just tends to people tend to work harder, or they tend to be excited about what they're doing. And when someone's excited about what they're doing, I think you tend to find that their work is best.
And we'll definitely go into the partnerships later into the episode. Would you say so that actually is a business decision to focus on something you're passionate on over something that on paper would perhaps produce a higher ROI, because in reality one would pay out better than the other?
Yeah, obviously it's not all passion work, and there's day-to-day stuff that everyone sort of has to do and is good at doing. But I would sort of say that there's always been this sort of model where you end up doing 70% of the day-to-day BD stuff, everything from managing clients to coming up with marketing campaigns, managing PR, etc., stuff like that. And then the other 30% sort of is sort of where we come into the sort of passion projects, if you will, where you're scouting for partnerships or talent, or talking to people. And I think there's like a ton of stuff that goes on obviously behind the scenes as well, where like, you know, for every partnership that everyone actually sees, there's probably 10 behind the scenes where like, you know, they're either in progress or, you know, we're sort of working on them, or, you know, they sort of like, you know, went down some path and we realized maybe we should come back to this when we sort of have more clear plans. So like, you know, I think there's you know, there's something exciting about that. And you know, the every 6 months or maybe even every month is like, it's like new. And you know, that's what I really enjoy about this job actually, is that like, you know, you don't know what's coming next, and crypto's evolving so fast. Like we had, you know, we sort of had the DeFi summer, and then we've had like a huge run, and we've had like NFTs, and it looks like, you know, gaming is going to be the next thing, and like who knows what's next. And you know, I think that's ultimately what attracts like, you know, a lot of our staff and probably a lot of people to crypto actually, is, you know, it's pretty exciting.
I mean, exciting is an understatement. It's absolutely insane in crypto. Sometimes there are weeks which feel like months. Like if you go out of crypto for 1 week, you're just so behind the curve. You've missed everything that's happened. And it's a blessing and a curse. A blessing because you can make years of progress in short amounts of time, and a bit of a curse because it can be exhausting and draining after like prolonged periods of time. Because I mean, we haven't had a break since early 2020, I feel like you said, with the DeFi summer, and it just does not slow down. We had a month maybe of a little bit of a break, but with FTX like pumping out partnerships throughout that entire period, has there been any sort of break or downtime for FTX where things have quietened down?
I think downtime probably not, and like there's always like, you know, a ton of stuff to do. And I think maybe there's just like just a shift of focus, and I think that could be refreshing as well. Sort of, you know, you go from like, you know, the sort of bull market that we've, you know, we just had. I don't know if it's finished, or sort of what's going on there, but you know, we're sort of looking at like onboarding as many clients as possible, and you know, talking to, you know, KOLs and media, and sort of like, you know, making sure that, you know, people know who we are, what we're doing. And of course, you know, a big part of that was obviously the partnerships. And then, you know, sort of you see a bit of a downturn, and like, you know, we sort of start going, okay, well, like, you know, things were crazy for like the last, you know, 6 months. And you know, all those things that we were like begging for every week, and you know, internal chats were like, you know, we need this, and you know, we can't, you know, we can't not have this next time. Like we're sort of going, okay, now things are a little bit slower, like, you know, still tons of work to do, but like sort of making sure that like, you know, when the next one comes around, we're not doing the same thing. And you know, sort of like, you know, that's staff, and that's, you know, upgrades to, you know, all of our trading systems for, you know, the matching engine, and sort of everything along those lines, so that, you know, we sort of have less and less downtime. You know, I think we did pretty good, but you know, there's sort of like an always can be better category. You know, the sort of the time to customer support, and all those other things. So we've been making a ton of improvements, like even in the sort of downturn. So yeah, I would say that, you know, things are probably technically not any slower, but just a different flavor.
A different flavor is a great way to put it, and shifting the focus can definitely help that consistent output keep things fresh and exciting. How did you end up at FTX? When did that journey begin?
Yeah, so this is I guess a pretty interesting one. So a buddy of mine sort of had known the Alameda guys for a little while, and he said, "Hey, Burg, they're doing this project." And this was sort of extremely early days. I think I was like member number 9 or 10 on the FTX Telegram, and probably, you know, user of a similar number. You know, back then there was sort of something like 3 markets or maybe less. It was an interesting one, and that sort of was circulating around. And I was working at a power company before this, doing you know, some engineering work. And you know, I sort of got to the point where I'd finished up one set of projects, and I was like looking to relocate to a different site. And you know, there was sort of like some time in the middle there where there was not a whole heap happening, and I was sort of unsure, you know, what the sort of plan was. And you know, this FTX thing came along, and obviously, like, I'd been, you know, sort of thinking about crypto for a long time. I think this was in 2019, and sort of had crypto as a hobby since 2016-ish, late 2016, and sort of I was, you know, sort of pretty excited about it. Was doing, you know, some trading, and you know, some scalping, and as I was sort of waiting, the sort of just spending a ton of time in the FTX Telegram, and the Telegram was growing, and the platform was growing, and I was sort of like keeping up to date. I was reading the help desks and stuff, and just naturally ended up helping other people who were sort of onboarding to FTX with like their problems regarding collateral and wallets and all sorts of stuff like that, as just like a as a community member, just because I really liked the platform. And then Darren, one of the BD guys at the time, sort of reached out to me. I was just like, hey, like Burg, you're like, you're answering a ton of questions in here. Like, does it make sense for you to like, help us out, more officially as like, a customer support, sort of representative? And I was just like, oh, well, this is pretty cool. Like, I've got my engineering company that like, I've got a bit of a break from at the moment. And like, they're offering me, some money here to do, to do some customer support, like effectively can do, both things at once. So I was like, oh, well, that, that sort of makes sense. Did that for a little while, went through, had the FTX, IEO launch, was pretty cool. And then I think about a week or so later, Darren messaged me on like a Thursday night, and he was like, hey Berg, like we're getting some people through to Hong Kong for the weekend, do you want to come party, come meet the team, etc. And I was just like, oh, like sure, like when are you guys thinking? And he's just like, how about you fly out tomorrow morning? So I was like I said, I was out on a farm, so it was like 3 hours that I drove to the airport that night, stayed overnight in sort of Brisbane, city, and then flew out to Hong Kong for the weekend, and sort of met the team and was hanging out. It was super cool, and the team at that point was like, I don't know, maybe 6 people, maybe less, which was pretty cool. Didn't really think anything of it. And then sort of 2 weeks later, they're like, hey, like, we sort of enjoyed, hanging out with you. Have you ever considered like moving to Hong Kong and joining the team? And I was just like, oh my God, like this would be pretty cool. So, as some backstory, I sort of studied economics at undergrad, and I did a Master's of Applied Finance. And the reason I did that was because I was like, super into, Bitcoin, and I really wanted to like do my thesis on Bitcoin. Unfortunately, my, my lecturer said no. So that was a bit of a bummer. But, I was sort of doing this engineering job in the interim, and, sort of always, would have liked to have had a job, in crypto. And this was sort of the opportunity that like, I guess just by pure luck ended up presenting itself, which, is pretty cool.
Incredible. That was not the story I expected. So it went from customer support on the side as a community member. So many crypto success stories. It's just people being useful community members to a project and then exploding up through that because people really appreciate genuine value. And then you one party and it's full time. Did you instantly quit your job and join?
Yeah, so I think they sort of presented me an offer, and then maybe like 2 weeks later I moved to Hong Kong or sort of something like that. So that was about 2 years ago now. I think at the time I was like the second guy to join the Western BD team, and there was, I think, basically at that time like 3 other people on in business development, which was pretty cool. It was super small at that time, and I guess remained pretty small for a pretty substantial time. So yeah, that, I think super grateful to have been given that opportunity, and like obviously listening to Sam back then as just a community member, I was just like, wow, this guy's just an absolute beast. Would love to sort of work with someone like as smart as this guy, at some point. And then little did I know, I actually ended up taking the job from him, which I think is pretty cool.
How did your imagined experience of what it would be like to work for Sam or with Sam vary from the actuality of who Sam is and what it's like to work with him?
Yeah, I obviously knew he was like a super smart guy, and I think when you actually get some in-person time with him, you sort of realize that like, wow, he's like, he's thought about like so much more stuff than I thought of. I'll sort of go, oh, like, we have to think about this. And he'll go, okay, yeah, I thought about that. And, here's like, here's something that, we could do to sort of combat that. And like, I think that's like super impressive. You sort of typically find people who are like, on sort of some spectrum of like, they're either like really analytical people and they're sort of like, very mathsy, and, they sort of like, punch numbers like crazy, and then you sort of end up with people on the other side of the scale, which are like, sort of like, super personable, sort of sales guys maybe, and sort of like I think Sam basically double dips into both of those, whereas like he's sort of like really good at talking to people, and obviously is like super sharp. So I think props to him. He's built a great business, and I guess along with the rest of the team, I think we've done pretty well.
Yes, but Sam has been on the podcast and he spoke very highly of his team, and his method of selection is looking for high ceiling people who are passionate. So it's pretty awesome to chat to someone from the team who has been immensely successful with, now I'm going to miss out some, Dolphin Entertainment, TSM, Major League Baseball, Miami Heat, and I mean, Blockfolio did Logan Paul. I don't know if that was with you guys. Then we had Tom Brady as well. Oh, it was with you guys, the Logan Paul as well.
Yep. So I mean, Blockfolio is like obviously like one of our sort of sister companies, I guess, if you'll call it that. Even though we just sort of rebranded to FTX now, because I guess that was getting a bit confusing. But yeah, I think like even in that sense, like we sort of have people helping in sort of all aspects. If there's if people need help on the sort of like portfolio FTX side, like there's resources there, and those guys help us out. Like they've got like an amazing sense of like PR and marketing, and like how to really engage user base. So like when the sort of my BD team is like struggling, we sort of go like, hey, like how are you guys thinking about this? And like it's always just refreshing to get like sort of someone else's sense on like how things are going, and what we could be thinking about, and how this might be seen in the media, and what we can sort of do to make sure that that sort of things are seen in a positive light.
Yeah, I think I've spoken to Alec from the Blockfolio team a couple times. Awesome guy, really nice. So every single one of these partnerships, what I'm struggling to see, besides them being huge, is something in common. You mentioned it briefly with the passion, but what goes through your guys' mind when choosing a partner for FTX? What are you guys looking for? Is there a big overarching goal that you're moving towards, or is it all on an individual case-by-case basis?
Yep. And I think maybe I would say that the overarching thing is actually that they are all big, and that actually is just like sort of our internal team motto that Sam always sort of like when we're sort of struggling with something, he's sort of like you have to think bigger, and like the plan is to always like sort of think of crypto as being beyond crypto, and like how can we engage people outside of crypto, and if you can do that, the sort of like the rewards that can be reaped are like much larger. You sort of imagine that crypto is still like ultimately pretty small compared to like other asset classes, and if you always just think within crypto, you're sort of like you're thinking of a pie that effectively is you're either going to have to be like stealing from other other sort of market participants, in the sense that like if there's only 10 users in the space, and sort of like 4 of them are Ethereum guys, and 4 of them are Solana guys, if you're launching a new chain, like you sort of have to be able to take those users. Whereas if you sort of go, okay, like let's expand out and say, okay, like which user base might have sort of something in common with with crypto traders, and sort of the simple thing there is gamers. I think there's like a lot of there's a lot of stuff in gaming which is like very much like crypto, whether that's like the grand exchange or an auction house, or sort of like skins and NFTs, or sort of like the idea of like building up sort of your champion, and like risk management, I think is like a big part of games, and I think all of those things are like pretty concurrent to crypto. So that when we're thinking about that, we're like, okay, like what's the biggest thing we can do? And like obviously TSM massive, LCS massive, MLB massive, Miami Heat Stadium like obviously pretty large, and that's sort of like what we've been trying to go for. It's just like how can we have like the biggest impact here, and like how can we like send positive signals for sort of people in crypto, and like do our part to sort of like help get the awareness out of there. And I think that's happening. I think I would have never have guessed sort of a year ago that we would have been at this point now. I was just like I was standing in the shower the other day, and I was just like, holy shit, like there's like all these like big brands are like taking crypto very seriously. And I was just like, wow, that's like really cool, because like when I sort of started in crypto, it was like you were never sure whether, this was actually going to, become a thing, or like, you sort of always hoped that it was going to be a thing. And like, obviously, like to take a career in crypto is like, taking a pretty big bet on that, but you were never certain that it was actually going to be a thing. There's like a ton of regulations, and there's like a ton of things that might sort of stop it. But when you sort of get to the stage now where like companies are very, very accepting of like crypto, and like, they're actually looking for official crypto partners, you sort of go, well, like, if these guys are accepting of it, and like audiences like appear to be fairly accepting of it and like pretty excited about it, that like, maybe this sort of crypto thing is pretty legit and here to stay.
It's on our own small non-FTX level, we've experienced that level of surreal growth, and accompanied with the world situation with travel closing down and stuff, it doesn't feel real, does it? It all feels like it's changed from the normality of what the world used to be, and crypto's exploded during this time that the entire world's changed. So it's pretty crazy to see. And yeah, reality sometimes, like that moment in the shower, just hits, and it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, I think crazy exciting, and it's definitely like, I think it's definitely like the steps in the right direction. And if you could sort of like look at it and go like, hey, is this, is our industry moving in the right direction? I think the answer is like definitely yes. And like, is it going to continue to move in the right direction? Well, like, I hope so. And I think, I sort of I'm pretty confident that FTX is going to have like a pretty substantial impact in sort of making sure that like, our industry moves in the right direction.
Having worked with the FTX team, having met a bunch of team members, like 4 or 5 now, and interacted with them quite a bit, I'm very happy for you guys to be leading this move. I think it's in great hands. Something you said really stood out to me, and that was Sam's go-to advice of think bigger. Can you give like a specific story or example where you or the team was stuck and that advice just changed everything?
Yeah, I think it happens like a fair bit. So we were I guess just to kick this whole sort of like partnership combo. I don't even know what you would call it. The sort of the Miami Heat Stadium. We're all sort of going like, what can we do to like what can we do to sort of like get people, get our name out there and sort of get people talking about us. And we were sort of like, oh well, we could sponsor a tournament or sort of something like that, or we could like we could get like a patch on a team's jersey or something like that. And like Sam was just like, I think you guys like I think we need to think bigger than that. And we had sort of like thrown around the stadium idea like in sort of earlier days of FTX, and I think we sort of came back to it because it's there's something there. It's big. People know it. It's a fairly large thing, and every time it gets media attention, it's going to be the FTX arena. And I think there's not much bigger than that. If like every time there's a sports event there, that it sort of gets the light. And even to sort of come back to my point there before about like expanding the pie, it's sort of like that's always been the sort of thing that we need to think about. Is like how can we think just beyond what we're offering. And like we've sort of done we've done a ton of stuff from the tokenized stocks and things like that. We're like, okay, like how can we like get users who are like may not be crypto native, but maybe trading native, to sort of like get involved in crypto. And for every one of those that we onboard, like that's great because they tell a friend, and next thing you sort of like you've expanded out the sort of people who are like interested in crypto and might actually bring value to the space. So I think just thinking about that in sort of every aspect is like being pretty beneficial.
Just like scaling your position size up changes trading drastically. It feels like
Yep.
the bigger you get, the more the marketing game changes drastically as well. You now have these immense options which are hard to measure tangible output out on. Have you experienced that changing throughout FTX?
Yeah, that's a funny one. So when I first joined FTX, we were running this trading competition called Battle Royale. And, we're still an extremely small exchange at that time. And like, there was a ton of competitors out there, and those competitors were like, obviously had been around for a lot longer than us and sort of had very big bankrolls to sort of like, pay for competitions and prizes and influences. And I sort of just remember, sort of doing hard negotiations with a ton of people where they were like, hey, I want 3 Bitcoin. And I'm just like, there's no way you're getting 3 Bitcoin. Like, how about this? And like, I think Bitcoin back then was just like significant, or obviously significantly cheaper than that at the time. And it's sort of like, I think having come from a place where like we were always sort of like, evaluating, what the upside is, and like, is this, a good, EV, play? Like, what happens if this goes well? What happens if this goes badly? I think like, that sort of conditioned a lot of the thinking that we do have, and like how we do think about things. And, I think, like you said, it can be pretty easy to, to sort of like scale up and sort of like, take on additional risk. But like, ultimately you need to make sure the decisions that you're making there are like solid decisions. Like, whether you're trading with like $100 or, $1 million, whether you lose 10% of that, like it hurts either way. Right. And like, you sort of want to make sure that you're making those right decisions, and like, being able to assess like whether a decision is, likely to be favorable or unfavorable, like is good, whether that's in trading or like, when it comes to like a business sense, or sort of going for partnerships or collaborations.
So what tips the no or maybe to a yes? Is it one key measure you're looking for? Is it a whole bunch of variables that you analyze? How much is numerical? How much is subjective?
Yeah, I think it's probably a bit of both. And I think like a big piece of this is like, if there's something that like you're unsure about, or like you're not entirely sure whether it's going to be, positive or negative, but like the chances of it being negative, or like the downside of being negative, are sort of like not that high. You could sort of like, one example is like, hey, you're looking at like, doing this trading competition, and, there's sort of like, some cost, and like, if no users end up doing the trading competition, or like, someone doesn't end up doing it, like, oh, cool. Like, the people who do participate just get a bigger prize. That's cool. That you sort of go, oh, well, we should have done better to engage people here, or we should have, done more marketing, or, maybe this is just not something that's fun for people. Whereas if you sort of like look at something and go, the upside here is like really good, but like, if this goes badly, we sort of end up like, with a ton of like, maybe PR problems, or, maybe there's like, something that like, causes like a bad relationship between, two parties, and you sort of go, well, if it's 50-50 in that case, then you should really be thinking about like whether it's actually a good trade to take or not.
Yeah, it's explains that in more detail. As the crypto industry continues to mature, it's natural that more and more wealth building platforms will arise. The problem with many of these, however, is that they are often so complex that it disincentivizes people from using them. This is why I've partnered with Nexo, one of the top crypto lending platforms in the world. With over 1.5 million users and 15 billion assets under management, Nexo combines the yield earning features of crypto with the familiarity and ease of centralized finance. Nexo allows you to earn interest at a competitive rate on crypto and fiat. They also allow you to take out loans using crypto as collateral, so that you have access to cash without needing to sell your investment. You can even trade directly on the web platform and mobile app in an intuitive and secure way. If you're looking to embark on the journey to financial freedom whilst minimizing time and frustration, I highly recommend you check them out by visiting nexo.io. That's nexo.io. Okay, so I want to continue this in two parts right now. I want to finish off talking about the sports partnerships, and then dive into what I'm containing my excitement for, which is the gaming partnerships. Is a X / maybe refined it with, I don't know, the new Skyrim update, or you guys FOMO me back into League of Legends. Is there any macro strategy of FTX trying to get more involved in the sports market in general, from Miami Heat to Major League Baseball, with Tom Brady? Is it potentially, now this was an idea I had, sports betting markets getting set up on FTX? Is this at all possible or planned?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's sort of something that, we've thought about, and, you probably heard about our Trump markets. Like, we sort of have had a small foray into, those prediction markets, and, they can be potentially pretty exciting, and, it's sort of something that we're looking into, but like, of course, need to make sure that we do them well. One other piece of like, a ton of these sports one is like, they make great ways for like sports fans to be able to interact sort of with their celebrity uh, celebrity stars even through NFTs and like experiences. And sort of one piece of this might be like sort of like a Tom Brady NFT that allows you to have lunch with him. And like, that's obviously good for, crypto, as it sort of gets people, knowing what an NFT is. And sort of like, I think it's also good for Tom because, he sort of gets to interact with his fans, and his fans get the opportunity to interact with him. So, I think we're seeing like a lot of opportunity there where like, there's sort of like this engagement thing where like, businesses like find a new way to sort of interact with their clients and fans, and like fans get that access. So I think that's part of it, and then ultimately, like we said, that grows the pie because people sort of get this idea of like what an NFT is. They have to onboard to a crypto exchange probably to do it. They might need to get some USDC, which they sort of have to do some type of trade for. So like, sort of even in that sense, it's like a way that they can sort of become more familiar with like what crypto is and how it works, and I guess get comfortable with it. I think like a lot of people aren't, they sort of have like maybe some bad narratives, and they sort of think Bitcoin is this, and like this is that, and I think like if they sort of experience the product and they go, hey, like this this doesn't feel so bad, or this just feels like interacting with any other app, like maybe they walk away with a positive experience, and like next time someone says something bad about Bitcoin at like a family barbecue, or like some friend drinks, they go, hey, like that's not true, like I did this Bitcoin thing and it was pretty easy.
That's got to be a huge obstacle for you when looking for partnerships. Just that stigma with drug money, money laundering, all the stuff we know is not true about Bitcoin that the media seems to still think it's true. It's a Ponzi. It's going to dump. It's all going to zero. All the normal FUD that we've heard.
Yeah, and I think more recently one that sort of like has probably had more of a like a big impact, or sort of a probably pretty negative impact, is like the power consumption of Bitcoin. And a lot of the partners that we're sort of talking to and have talked to have sort of said like, yeah, all that other stuff, like we can sort of we sort of think that that's like probably a bit of rubbish, but like the power thing is like something that we're like we're really sort of very conscious about. And that's sort of something that like with Sam's and I guess the wider team's like philanthropic vision, that like that's sort of something that is very important to us. We launched FTX Climate last week, I think, sort of like going carbon negative, which I think is pretty cool. And like we have a ton of stuff planned there, and we are very conscious about that. And like I think that's sort of also been good for like this growing the pie thing, where like people go, oh well, like this, all the stuff that I'm seeing about Bitcoin being like really bad for the environment, like the guys who are in the industry are like actively like going carbon negative, and they're not going carbon negative in like 2057, like they're doing it this year or next year, or like they're committing money every year to it. And like that's like pretty unheard of for sort of like everyday businesses to sort of do that. Like there's a sign in the elevator out here in our office building, and it's like, help this building go carbon neutral by 2030. And I'm just like, geez, that is, this poster is up like 9 years early. What's going on? Like these, like why is it not next year? So like, I think that's pretty cool about the crypto industry. Like, sort of, I think we're pretty adaptable, and people have something to say, and like, we've done something about it. Like we are doing stuff, and you can see that, and it's not just like, it's just not just promises. Like we've bought the, we've sort of done the credits. We've got the plan in place. There's a ton more plans to come, and this is just the first piece of what we're doing. So it's good to see a ton of other exchanges out there are sort of doing similar things as well. They're obviously being good actors, which is good for our space.
I mean, crypto moves fast and crypto is adaptable, but FTX is a step above that in speed. And I've heard Sam say it a few times. You guys don't even think you move that fast. You just don't understand how everyone else doesn't move that fast. I imagine it's the same with it is the same with the partnerships. Every month we have something new coming out, and we've been talking for like 20 minutes now about partnerships, and we haven't even scratched the surface. Logan Paul, how did that happen? What was the logic behind that one?
Yeah, this is another one of those ones that you were sort of talking before about before the before the podcast was like passion projects, and sort of one of the guys sort of knew Logan's manager, and he was just like, hey, like, do we want to do Logan's got this fight coming up, do we want to do we want to do something? And everyone's just like, yeah, that sounds pretty cool. And then he was like, okay, like if there's no objections, and that's sort of how it rolls here. Is very, very commonly it's like you'll post in Slack and be like, unless anyone says anything otherwise in 24 hours, I'm doing this thing. And then that's just it, you just go and do it. And sort of he said that, and everyone's just like, oh, this sounds pretty cool, like maybe we can get QR code or sort of something, and did that, which is pretty cool. And that was it. And he sort of hats off to Zane there. He did a lot of the work there, so can't claim that one. Maybe you should get Zane on the podcast and have a chat with him.
Oh, I was actually going to circle back to you at the end of this podcast. Who else? Which other FTX stars do we need to get on? Another amazing one. Now, the one which that we spoke about it before the podcast as well. We spoke quite a bit before the podcast. The TSM partnership. Now, as someone who in university watched a lot of LCS, who you've now also partnered with, TSM was my favorite team. It was awesome. I remember watching them play Cloud9 in an epic battle, and it would have been like a fantasy to own TSM Sunday, or and like be an esports player. And now here FTX are diving into the esports world. Is it a passion project? Do you guys see huge potential in the future? Something to do with NFTs, a new area of the market to grow the pie, or all of the above?
Yeah, I think it's all of the above. And I think, this is one that this is probably one of Sam's big passion projects. I think he, avid gamer, loves League of Legends. That's sort of one that I think we sort of see it as being like a really, a really fun, sort of sector, which sort of like has a lot of similarities to crypto, and, sort of will be good at growing the pie. So yeah, I think that's one that Sam was particularly passionate about, and I think this is probably like falls under one that's one of his passion projects. Obviously, plays a ton of LoL himself, and I think we all see that there's like a pretty big crossover here between like gamers and people who are potentially like interested in crypto. They sort of understand all of the the basics there, from trading and skins and stuff like that, and then obviously they're computer native, and I think that's like really important. And I think sort of like you tend to find people who are computer native are the people that sort of like are maybe more adventurous, and maybe are the type of guys that can get involved in sort of being involved. And I remember like there was always these things that you could sort of like when it came to playing games, you would always like have the opportunity to like buy skins or like boosts or whatever you would buy back then, with Bitcoin. And, that I think like, I think people might have seen, those type of things like, your level 99 strength RuneScape account, and it was like, 0.1 of a Bitcoin or sort of something like that. And, I think a lot of gamers has probably had like, that type of interaction before. So I think like it's a good natural crossover. And then, obviously like, you sort of like, as they're computer native, they probably understand the concept of NFT. Like, a skin can, effectively be an NFT, as we were sort of chatting a bit about before. And like, I think that's like pretty exciting, and like it would be interesting to see whether, gaming companies moving forward sort of like embrace NFTs as skins, or like, some type of metric which like, they can sort of like NFT skins like they sort of did with, Counter-Strike and the knives.
Yeah, that was awesome to see with Counter-Strike, and I'm sure there'll just be non-stop innovation in that space. Ideas we haven't even thought of will probably be the biggest ones for NFTs. Amazing to see you guys with TSM. Has your relationship to gaming or LoL, or like just the possibilities you see there, changed? Have you considered buying old school RuneScape, or?
I mean, if anyone has a contact at RuneScape, then like, would love to talk to them. Like, I think there's something there for sure. Yeah, I think with the sort of with these partnerships, it sort of made me think a little bit differently about like gaming experience, and like games in general. I'll be the first to say that I've spent a ton of money on LoL skins when I was in university as well, and I think that's pretty cool. And like it's sort of something that like people are always immensely very proud of, like their characters transmog or their characters skin. So I think there's something there that sort of much the same like people sort of buy nice clothes for themselves, so you can sort of see them doing, a similar thing for their online presence. So yeah, I think I'm potentially pretty bullish on like gaming NFTs, and like, I think there's like, I think when you do gaming NFTs though, you really need to be very conscious about, how they interact, and how they play a role in the ecosystem. And you could sort of see them, if I think we were chatting before about this as well, sort of like, with skins, like if they, if there's sort of like no barrier to entry, they could be tough, sort of like you would imagine that like, when you leave a game that you just sell off all your skins, and maybe that's bad for the game economy. And like, you sort of imagine that like you would need to think of ways, or creative ways. You actually came up with a cool one, which is like, you sort of like burn a fragment of the skin, or like you burn a piece of it and you need to repair it, or sort of something like that. I think like, that would be a way that, that these gaming companies might be more comfortable with, NFTs, because like, if they're sort of just pure tradable, you could sort of imagine that like they might miss out on a ton of revenue. And while they might think the ideas is cool, that, that's sort of like a pretty bad business decision for them to take.
Yeah, we did. And it makes sense why someone like League wouldn't want to do that, because so much of their business relies on people buying skins, using them. But what's your favorite League of Legends skin? And it's so rude of me for not asking, what position do you play?
Jeez. So I typically play AD carry, and that's because mid is always taken. So like I'm a mid guy. My favorite skin, I think it's medieval Twitch probably. So I play Twitch. I basically exclusively play Twitch. So yeah, any of his I think are pretty cool. I like his voiceover. I think he's funny. What about you?
I'm a Rengar was a Rengar one-trick pony, so I don't think Twitch would like me very much.
No, definitely not. Let's make sure we're playing on the same team.
Yeah, we'll play some League together at some point, make that happen. I'm also pretty terrible and haven't played in a while, so get ready for an inting Rengar in top lane.
That's fine. I think that's about standard anyway.
So one thing which I found really interesting was so many people speak of Twitter being one of the best networking tools, not just in crypto, but in a lot of different industries. Yet, as head of partnerships, you don't have much of a Twitter presence. You don't spend too much time there. I occasionally see you offering to trim people's armor on RuneScape or posting jacked pictures. But besides that, you don't spend too much time there.
I think I spend a ton of time there, actually. I think, I sort of think that like there's a ton of actual good stuff to be taken from Twitter. I think, I think I don't post that much. Maybe I only just like to post. I think most of my posts you'll actually find are like, fairly trolly, or sort of like, funny.
I love it. It was so much fun to research.
Yeah. So I think, I sort of only post something when I think I've, come up with something a little bit funny. But in general, I think there's like a ton of like really, really smart people on there. And, I sort of would, I think that's like probably the majority of my job actually. It's just like making sure that I'm like up to date with, what people are thinking, and, the latest thing. And like, obviously being on the partnerships team, one thing that we sort of, we handle a lot of is like listings. And, we sort of need to be, on the cusp of the new stuff. And like, if I sort of get, like you said, if you get a week behind in crypto, like you feel lost, because like, so much can happen in a week that, you sort of, you might feel like you're missing out. So like, keeping up to date with Twitter on like, what the latest crazes are, what the new hot coin of the week might be, what the new hot coin of next week might be, is there anything that, we need to be doing to sort of, keep up to date with, what other platforms are doing, like, how are people seeing the market, like, the sort of the things that you do in a bullish versus like a bearish sentiment market are very different. And like, you need to sort of like appreciate like, the decisions, and sort of factor that into your decisions. And like, I think that might even be one more, sort of the tipping point that we sort of talked about before. Like, success of like a campaign can be very much, dependent on like, how active and excited people are about, the market at the time. And like, even if you come up with this really cool concept of like, market is feeling a bit sad, or, people sort of like, a bit bearish about the situation, then like, they might be less inclined to participate in that type of thing.
So I guess that explains, I'm not surprised, because I was surprised that I didn't think you were that active or spent that much time on Twitter, but it seems like most of us, you find it one of the best places to stay up to date with the market. how would you recommend the average person use Twitter as a way of
Yep.
keeping in touch with market sentiment? And do you have any other sources or market sentiment alpha you'd like to share with people?
Yeah, and yeah, I guess just coming back to the Twitter comment quickly, I guess I also spent a ton of time just like, lurking and making funnies on the FTX main, the FTX main handle. And I sort of thought, maybe this makes sense for me to start a personal one and do some of my trolling there. Maybe
Well,
less
that's
of
you
the
on the
creative.
FTX main handle.
So I can't obviously take all credit for it, but I certainly have posted a couple of things there from time to time. So yeah, that may or may not have been me in some instances. Yeah, I think Twitter is like a fantastic tool for sentiment, and I think there's sort of like, if you're going to use like some type of fundamental analysis, I think it's like really important to like look at like how other people are thinking about the market, and not to say that you just like go out there and copy exactly what someone else is doing. Like you should obviously like try and form some of your own decisions, because like if someone's bullish and someone's bearish, there one of them is like probably unlikely to be right. So I think just like getting a sense of like how people are thinking about the market like could be ultimately really handy. So would say that, yeah, definitely spending some time on Twitter, to sort of just like see, what some of the big accounts are saying is like, probably pretty important. As far as like alternative sources of alpha, trading chats. So I spend a fairly large amount of my time also just lurking, like a ton of trading chats, seeing, what people are saying, how they're feeling about the market. Sort of like you sort of get like the some of the Twitter sentiment, but maybe like some sort of like deeper level stuff when like you sort of like go into these chats, because like Twitter, like you sort of get like the big overall view of like how some of the big accounts are sort of like thinking about the market, and like those big accounts have been around for a while. They're probably pretty good at what they do. Like should definitely like consider like some of their opinions when it comes to the market, or at least how they're thinking about the sentiment of the market. And then when you sort of dive into like those trading chat rooms, you sort of see like how the average guy, maybe not too dissimilar to yourself, is like thinking about how the market is. Like did they lose a ton of money on the liquidation? Like how does that impact like how they're going to be like responding? Are they like are people like TWAPing in? Are they thinking about like are they still just accumulating, or have they sort of said like, oh, like I hate this crypto thing, it's over for me? So like I think there's like a ton of like signaling that you can sort of get from them. And I think all those pieces of information can sort of like piece together, and you can sort of see like if everyone in a group is saying like they're selling and it's over, like maybe you should use that and sort of like come up with how you think that might what might happen there. Or you sort of see like a lot of institutions getting involved. Maybe you see like a ton of crypto exchanges like having sponsorships and platforms, and maybe like you're able to sort of like look at some long term horizon to sort of say, well, there's like obviously some interest here for crypto in the wider space. Maybe this is something that maybe this is something that I like.
That's tremendously useful. Any specific trading chats that you'd recommend people go lurk in?
I mean, yours, of course. And I think I hang out a lot in the FTX one. I think the FTX trading room, like is pretty important. There's like obviously you sort of get a mix of the sort of like all demographics of traders on the FTX one. And sometimes I think like that's pretty important too. Like if you're going to look at trading rooms, you should make sure that like your trading room has like some diversity in it. I think like much like your Twitter feed, you should make sure that your Twitter feed is diverse as well, because like if you just sort of follow three guys and they're always sort of saying one direction, then like it's kind of hard to see like whether they're just like amplifying themselves or not. But like if you can find sort of like a generalist sort of chat, and you can listen in, and if everyone is sort of like happy and sort of like can't make comments in there freely, and like doesn't just turn into like somewhere where people bash sort of bash the opinions of other people, like sort of somewhere where they they might post good TA or good FA, then like I think you can at least look at that and say, well, like that's like someone's come up with this theory and they've sort of been able to like justify it with something, then like maybe there's something into that, and like, you know, maybe that helps you shape yours, or maybe you disagree and you say, oh, well, I don't think so because of like XYZ reason. But I think always you should be thinking about like, you know, what inputs am I putting into my decision here, such that like I can come out with, you know, something that I'm happy with, and like hopefully it's you know, the right decision. But like if it's not, then you sort of go back and you say, hey, like maybe I didn't like, you know, maybe this didn't look good like on like sort of a macro sense, but like, you know, I sort of like didn't account for like XYZ thing, and like maybe I should have like, you know, maybe I should have been more in, you know, sort of, you know, given more weighting to, you know, a particular variable. You know, I think that's a pretty important part to trading.
That's a lot of self-awareness. I think I'll stick to anyone who disagrees with me is wrong. You should be flamed or blocked. But if anyone wants to take your advice, they're welcome to. But you've shed a lot of alpha. We've gone deep into the FTX partnerships, but there's one area alpha we haven't dived into yet, and that's like a couple of your posts have been you staying in really good shape despite your immense workload. How do you balance gaming, crypto, trading, the gym?
Jeez. Oh, thanks, I guess. Yeah, and like, you know, some of those pictures, you know, are recent, some of them are not so recent. So like there's, you know, there's something there. But I think, you know, I think for me, it's always been about like, you know, if I'm going to be like focusing on something and working hard, like it's always just nice to have like, you know, give myself 2 hours where I can sort of like get away from the office or get away from whatever I'm thinking about, whether that's studying for uni or like, you know, trading or sort of anything like that, and go, you know what, like this is where I'm just going to go and like, you know, de-stress and like, you know, not have to worry about, you know, the charts, and sort of like get away from my phone for a few hours. And I think ultimately it's like something that like it actually enhances like, you know, the sort of like productivity that I sort of have. I sort of notice that when like, you know, I'm not getting out and active and exercising, that like, you know, I sort of like get distracted easy, or like, you know, I sort of might make, you know, decisions that, you know, ultimately I just go, man, I wish I had like, you know, thought about that a bit more, or like, you know, I think there's like, you know, I think there's a ton there. And I think like people might underweight like, you know, how much of their, you know, health and sort of like mental health is affected by like, you know, how their body's doing, you know, making sure that they're eating good food, making sure that like, you know, hydrated. And I'm like, you know, I'm some like fitness help guru that's going to try and sell you a meal plan. But, you know, I sort of think that like, you know, once you're sort of like in tune with like, you know, what thinking, you know, clearly, and like what feeling good feels like, then you sort of like feels, you know, it doesn't feel good to go back to a state where you're just like, you know, feeling unhealthy and not feeling rested. And, you know, I think, you know, in order to sort of to do well, I think it's like really important to make sure that you do look after, you know, your physical health, even if that means just taking your dog for like a half an hour walk a day. I think it's nice just to, you know, sort of get out and be a bit active.
What are your personal protocols for health and productivity? So what routines do you like? What habits do you put in place to make sure you operate at the best of your ability?
So I guess I've been lifting for like, geez, I think like 11 years now, pretty consistently. And like, it's just sort of something where like, if I don't go to the gym, like, you know, 5 or 6 days a week, that I end up feeling like crap. So like, you know, gym is definitely something that like, you know, my body is probably addicted to it, to be honest. So like, you know, that's sort of something that I always like, you know, set aside some time. And like, you know, I live something like 2 Ks from work. I don't know, you know, what's that, like 1.x miles. So I, you know, try to like at least walk either home from work or to walk, or, you know, try and get like some steps in, because like, you know, obviously sitting at a desk all day is not fantastic for, you know, not fantastic for you. So if there's like, you know, if there's an opportunity to like walk and take a call, or like, you know, just walk and, you know, sort of get some steps in, that, you know, I always sort of do that. As far as nutrition, I think, you know, this is something that's pretty important. At work here, I get these like, you know, muscle meals, I guess you would call them, delivered. So, you know, we sort of have the opportunity here to like order takeout or order, you know, whatever we sort of wish. And like, you know, I always sort of end up going for these muscle meals most of the time, because, you know, eating good food is important. And
What's a muscle meal?
A muscle meal. So basically it's just like, you know, sort of basically it's just like a meal where they like they track the protein, carbs, and fats, and like you sort of get like, you know, X amount of grams of meat, and, you know, X amount of grams of rice. And like, you know, I guess they're quote unquote healthy food. You know, not that I'm impartial to enjoying the snack table, but like, you know, if I just know that if I eat like, you know, 2 or 3 of those meals a day, that I'm pretty happy with, you know, how my body's going to react to it.
And so actually got some really nice alpha from your feed. Snickers protein bars,
Oh my God.
Grenade and Quest were my favorite. Those were definitely well.
Yeah, the Snickers bars, the like you should see. So like I ordered a few boxes of those Snickers bars, like I love them. And then I walked over to the snack table one day and I was just like, where the fuck are those bars gone? And then I just like everyone in the office has been eating these bars. And then I posted I posted internally being like, can we get some more of those Snickers bars? And like Ryan on the OTC team is just like, legit, I want you to buy that many Snickers bars that there's like a box from the floor to the roof. I never want us to run out of Snickers bars again. So we've got we've got the high protein ones, we've got the peanut ones, we've got the white chalk, we've got all of them. And sort of like I think that like also helps us like choosing snacks that are healthy. Like these, I think they taste pretty good. So like if you have the sort of choice between like eating an actual chocolate bar, which I do enjoy doing, not fantastic for you, or like a protein bar with like 20 grams of protein and like pretty okay macros, then like if you can sort of do that on occasion, I think like it's all about consistency. And I think a lot of things are just all about consistency. It's just about doing the right thing.
Consistency and sustainability, especially when it comes to health and fitness. So many diets are reversed the second they end. So many workout programs end after 4 to 8 weeks. But is there anything else with regards to self-improvement or productivity, habits which you employ that you found really help you get to where you are today? This could be sleep, reading, meditation, anything like that you find really helps you.
Yeah, so I think I think obviously staying healthy is like pretty important, but I think also like one thing that sort of like the sort of the sort of work culture here is like there's you sort of just you sort of just do it, and you're like there's sort of like no set hours, and you can sort of just come in when you want, and sort of as long as you're being productive, then that's cool. But like one big piece of that, and I think one big piece of that sort of like relates to trading as well, is like making sure that like when you're being productive and when you're being unproductive, and like when you're being unproductive, doing something that like allows you to de-stress or relax, whether it's like walking to get a coffee, or playing a game of League of Legends maybe, or sort of watching some YouTube, and like sort of going, well, like if I've sort of like lost concentration here, like am I really making good decisions? Like am I replying to clients and customers in a way that like I'm going to be happy about when I like check back in half an hour? Or should I just like relax for an hour, go for a walk, chat with some buddies, and sort of do something else, and then like come back to it later when I'm feeling a bit better? I think like that's sort of like a really important thing, like in sort of like whether it's study or working or trading or anything like that. It's just sort of like being able to look at what you're doing and saying like was this efficient, was this effective, and like am I going to be happy with what I just did in an hour's time, or am I going to have to do it again, or like is this going to be is this sort of something that I'm going to regret doing in an hour's time?
Terrific advice, Burg. This has been one of my favorite episodes ever. It's been an absolute delight talking to you. Would love to have you back on again in 6 months after a whole host of other partnerships I'm sure are going to be announced. Before we let you go, is there anything you can share with us that we should be excited for, that's about to come out for FTX, that's in the works?
Yep. Yeah, okay, maybe just some like I guess that chat in 6 months is probably going to be pretty cool. So we got a ton of stuff lined up, obviously some more partners lined up. We at the moment are looking into some new technology that we're looking to design around ticketing and NFTs, and we sort of think that there's like some pretty cool stuff to do there, and like maybe some events coming up might have the software. We'll have to see. Maybe we chat in a few months and sort of see. I mean, I think we're I think we think that there's something there that like can actually improve the user experience as far as like ticket reselling and like sort of counterfeiting. So let's see. No promises yet, but hopefully we can chat about that next time.
I can't wait to see that. Are there any partnerships or any directions of partnership industries that we can get a hint about that's to come?
Yeah, so I guess we'd say like we've got a ton in sport, and like we're now looking into other into other avenues, and like obviously I think the next sort of big one is going to be music. So I think there's there's potentially some cool stuff coming out in the sort of music space, and keep yourself tuned.
I'll be keeping an eye out for that. So excited for what's to come. Burg, thank you for a terrific episode. Meditators, that's all from us. We'll see you next time. Burg exuded passion for what he seemed to do. It was hard to listen to the sponsorships, the partnerships that FTX had made and not get excited myself. That may have just been because so many of our interests coincided, from fitness to gaming to building businesses and crypto. As he noted, crypto moves at an incredible speed and it's not easy to keep up to date. That is exactly why I have my research team write 6 free Market Meditations newsletters a week. We share the latest news and analysis so you can keep a finger on the pulse to keep up to date with what's going on in the markets. To access this, all you have to do is go to 𝐏𝐸𝐺 If you enjoyed this episode, check out my conversation with the CEO of FTX, Sam Bankman-Fried.